So welcome everyone to The Doctor is Inclusive with Dr. Nicola Finley. And welcome. And it's my pleasure to introduce Dr. Finley. She is on our board, the Global Wellness Summit board. And you can take that down now because I need to use my screen, because I get to introduce Nicola. Nicola is an integrative medicine and board certified internal medicine physician. And she's an adjunct faculty member at the Mel and Enid Zuckerman College of Public Health at the University of Arizona. And when we first met Nicola, she was at Canyon Ranch and is still very much a champion of Canyon Ranch. And we were so impressed with her because of her emphasis on prevention and wellness. She is an alumni of Brown University, the George Washington University School of Medicine, and the Integrative Medicine Fellowship Program at the University of Arizona. And what was so special about Nicola is that she has a passion for the underserved communities, for Black and Brown communities, and she has been a big help in helping us because we as an organization have wanted to do so much better when it came to diversity and inclusion. And we know that we need guidance and help. And so we reached out. And so I am delighted to turn this over to Nicola, who has orchestrated our time together today. And I'm happy to say this is the first of quarterly meetings that we'll do together. And we're going to ask each of you also to give us your input on how we can make this extremely valuable for the wellness world in general, which we feel needs to do better in this area. So Nicola, over to you.
Thank you very much, Susie, and thank you, Nancy, and really thank the whole global wellness team. Nancy, Susie, and their team really initiated and developed this concept, which I think is so important. And so their forward thinking hopefully will have a positive impact on all of us on this call and the wellness community beyond this phone call, and really a positive impact on the well-being of people of color as well as other marginalized and vulnerable populations. So welcome to our first of many, as Susie said, webinars on this topic of diversity and inclusion. I think of this as this is not one and done. This is an ongoing process so we can understand each other better, and we can hopefully improve the lives of others. So I am going to share my screen. And let's see, share. In the chat, please feel free to put comments, to include questions. We will be monitoring the chat, and I'll go ahead and get started. So as I mentioned and Susie mentioned, this is a series of webinars. So today's focus is wellness in the African American community, but we will be focusing on different dimensions of diversity and inclusion in the wellness sector quarterly over time. And when we think about that, really what we're talking about is centering at the margins. So if we think about the majority population being the focus many a times, we're hoping to center on marginalized communities, center on vulnerable communities in this conversation. So I'll give an outline of what we'll be talking about. We're going to be talking about definitions in order to really understand diversity and inclusion and to elicit change. I think we need to have understanding of the definitions that we tend to use. In addition, I'm thrilled to have a conversation with Tonya Calendar. She is on the Global Wellness staff, and she is the author of the Trends Report, Adding Color to Wellness. I'll be sharing some of my experience in the wellness industry, as well and as wellness, participating in wellness. I'll talk about storytelling because the focus and the highlight of this webinar is we're going to share stories. And then at the end, I'm going to invite you all in the audience to share stories as well. So if we start with definitions, the definitions that I'd like to focus in on are diversity, inclusion, equity, social justice, and then race and ethnicity would be the focus of today's presentation. For definitions, it's sometimes hard to find the right definition that you really feel encompasses the word well and really reflects the emotions behind the word. So how I decided to approach this is I went through the American Psychology Association has a framework for equity, diversity, and inclusion, and it was updated in April of this year. So I used their glossary of terms. And what's really interesting about all of these terms is that they're interconnected and they go hand in hand. And I'd like to first start by sharing my favorite quote about diversity and inclusion that includes these terms. It's by a former Stanford University dean, Dorica Blackman. She says, diversity is being asked to the dance. Inclusion is being asked to dance. Belonging is being able to dance how you want, and equity is having a turn at picking the DJ. I think that's a really important way to think about how it is all interconnected. So if I first start with diversity, diversity can be defined as any dimension that can be used to differentiate groups and people from one another. And the focus is on social identities that correspond to societal differences in power and privilege, and thus the marginalization of some groups based on specific attributes. And when we think about these specific attributes, I wanted to list them. And this is not an all-encompassing definition. So it's included, but not limited to race, ethnicity, culture, gender, gender identity, gender expression, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, religion, ethical values, spirituality, disability, age, political beliefs, national origin, immigration status, veteran status, family structure, and language. So if there are any dimensions that I didn't include in this list, feel free to put it into the chat because I would like for this to be an interactive conversation and to be inclusive. So when we think about diversity, it's really a range of human differences. Inclusion is a set of behaviors or culture that encourages people to feel valued for their unique qualities and experience a sense of belonging. And that sense of belonging is so important. It's an environment that offers affirmation, celebration, and appreciation of different approaches, styles, perspectives, and experiences. It's really feeling valued, it's feeling supported, it's feeling empowered, and it's really that idea of being welcomed or not feeling welcomed in a nurturing environment. If we think about equity, equity is an ongoing process of assessing needs, correcting historical inequalities, creating conditions for optimal outcomes of members of all social identity groups. So equity is not equality. And so that's really important because equity recognizes that each person has different circumstances. And then it allocates exact resources and opportunities needed for that person or that group to reach an equal outcome. In contrast, equality means that every group or every individual is given the same opportunities, the same resources. But equity means that it's not one size that fits all. And when we apply this to health, the CDC's definition of health equality is when everyone has an opportunity to be as healthy as possible. And I think that's really important. When we think about social justice, and it's interesting because many of us might not think about social justice in the wellness industry, but it's really the commitment to creating fairness and equity in resources, rights, and treatment of marginalized individuals and groups of people who don't share equal power in society. And that's really the difference. It's that power structure, the difference between the two. So social justice is a process, it's a goal, it's something that we strive for, it's a vision that all resources will be shared out equitably. It's really looking at privilege and opportunities and really trying to rebalance the inequities that exist in our society. So I thought it would be fun to show this illustration. This illustration is from the George Washington School of Public Health on their website of online resources. And I think Beatrice will be sharing the links to all of the websites that I'm referencing. And in this illustration, it's really a journey in how one can get from equality to equity to justice. So this tree represents a system, and this tree provides fruit. If we look at equality, on the tree on one side has more fruit than the other side. So the person underneath the side with a lot of fruit is able to get the fruit. The person on the other side is not able to get the fruit. And so one might think that is equal because they're on equal footing, but in reality, that's not equal, that's inequality. So how can we achieve equity? And if we try to achieve equity, if we look at the second picture, we see that the person that's needing more help and needing more resources has a taller tree. So even though there's more fruit on one side, that other person is able to get the fruit. But now if we look at the third picture, which is justice, it's very different. The tree is now straight. So it's that idea that that tree that was bent, that system has been corrected. So the structural changes have now occurred. So the tree is straight. And by having the tree straight, both individuals are on this equal footing, and they have a ladder that's a similar height. So that is one way we can think about equality versus equity versus social justice. So before I transition to introduce my special guest, Tonya Calendar, I thought I would talk about definitions again with race and ethnicity. These are terms that we use often, and for this terminology, I pulled from the definitions from the American Heart Association. Both race and ethnicity are social constructs. They're not rooted in biology. That's a really important distinction. So race is a person's self-identification with one or more social groups. It's that idea of being multiracial. Ethnicity is the social characteristics people may have in common, such as language, religion, regional background, traditions, and culture. And what I think is important to acknowledge is these terms are always evolving. So this terminology that I've posted here was updated in May of this year, and probably by the end of the year, there might be a different definition we will use. And I think that's important for us to acknowledge that our culture and terminology, things change over time. So I'd like to introduce Tonya Calendar, and before I stop sharing my screen, I thought I would share, and maybe many of you might be familiar with the Global Wellness Trends Report. And if any of you on the call have read the Trends Report and wants, to put in a comment in the chat about your feelings about it, in particular Tonya's article, feel free. I enjoyed reading it. I've read it multiple times. She wrote the article on adding color to wellness. And that trends report was released in January, and there's a mid-year update that was just released. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen so we can, so I can do a good job in introducing Tonya. And Tonya, if anyone has questions for Tonya, please put the questions in the chat, because Nancy and Susie will be fielding a question and answer right after Tonya shares her information. And again, I'd like for this to be inclusive. So Tonya Calendar is a research fellow with the Global Wellness Institute. She is part of the research team which studies the wellness economy in a variety of its industries. Most recently, she researched the physical activity sectors around the world. and analyze various pathways to mental wellness. When she's not performing economic research, Tonya has worked to support the mental health and well-being of teens and young adults. Tonya is the author of Adding Color to Wellness from the Global Wellness Trends Report, The Future of Wellness 2021. The focus of our discussion today with Tonya will be as a trend writer. And I think her story was groundbreaking. It brought up the issue of racial injustice in the wellness community, in the wellness world, and it brought that information forward. So what I'd like to do is to introduce Tonya, who I think of as a storyteller. And so I'll go ahead and get started. So Tonya, I'll have you unmute yourself. And Tonya, there's so many dimensions of wellness, and the Global Wellness Institute defines wellness as the active pursuit of activities, choices, and lifestyles that lead to a state of holistic health, and explains how wellness is multidimensional. Your trends report is entitled Adding Color to Wellness. And so I've just defined wellness. Can you tell us about your trends report and why you wrote it?
Sure. Well, thanks for having me in this discussion. I'm really excited about your talks. As you said, my trends report is entitled Adding Color to Wellness. And in all honesty, when I was asked to write a trends report about this, I was very reluctant because I wasn't really sure if people wanted to hear about racial inequity in this field and whether they would actually listen. And also it's kind of personal. If any of you have read the trend, I talk about my personal experiences and actually some of the experiences of my family. But you know, in the end, I decided to do it because I thought it would be great to spark a conversation, and hopefully that conversation can go somewhere. So briefly about my trend. As you can imagine, it discusses diversity and inclusion in the wellness industry. And I talk about what I consider to be a false narrative that some in the industry have perpetuated, which is that wellness is just for people who are white and wealthy. But also in the trend, I talk about inequality that exists in wellness. Black and brown people have very different experiences when we try to pursue wellness activities. And often it's harder and more stressful for us. So I think this needs to change, and we need to add color to wellness. And what does it actually mean? Well, it means incorporating the needs of people of color into wellness products and spaces. That means valuing our wellness needs. But it also means including more Black and brown wellness professionals in all aspects of the industry. And that means not just the provision of services and products, but also the creation of those services. And, you know, what I hope is that adding color to wellness is not just going to benefit people like me. I really expect that it's going to enrich and improve the wellness industry as a whole. So thank you again for letting me just talk about that.
And I think it will make a significant impact. I think you brought so many points up that I learned from you from reading your well-researched trends report. And many of your stories, your personal stories about you and your family also resonated with me as a Black woman, and as well, I'm in the wellness industry. So personally, I could relate to many of the points that you made, as well as professionally, I could relate to many of the points that you made. So I'm so glad that really you put yourself out there transparently. And so kudos to you, and I'm grateful. So what I was hoping we could do also on this call, Tonya, if you could just share maybe one or two highlights from the trends report that we can really spark a conversation, and we'll have a question and answer with you, of course, at the end. But is there one aspect that you wouldn't mind sharing with us on this call?
Well, you know, there is something that I touched on in the trends report. I essentially talked about different areas of wellness. I talked about exercise, nutrition, mental wellness, and being out in nature. And I wanted to actually share a story that I didn't talk about in the trend, which has to do with something that's very near and dear to my heart, and that is mental wellness. Now, last year, the GWI research team produced a report on mental wellness. And in it, we talked about how to support mental wellness using tools and techniques to help build resiliency and help us cope with the challenges that we face. And to put it simply, find something that makes you happy or relaxes you or rejuvenates you and try and do it more often, right? But as I mentioned in my report, for people of color, sometimes doing what makes you happy or is good for you actually makes you more stressed out and sad instead. So my story is a knitting story. I am an avid knitter. I have been knitting for over 30 years, and it was actually my father that supported my knitting. He used to bring me yarn from Southern Africa, and that is how I started to knit. Now, after a couple of years, that kind of dried up, and so I actually had to go out to local yarn stores to purchase some more yarn. And now, yarn stores have a reputation for being warm, friendly, inviting places where people who are excited about yarn and bright colors can go in, talk about their projects, get advice, and sit with other knitters. But my experiences at yarn stores were very different. I would go and I found the staff to be unhelpful. Sometimes I was actually followed around the store, or people would ignore me. And those chatty knitters sitting around the table would often just stop talking and stare at me as I browsed around the shop. Now, my experience is due in part to a false narrative in the knitting community, and that is that Black women don't knit, nor do other people of color. It's a false narrative. But when I walked into those yarn stores, people saw me as a Black woman, not as a fellow knitter. So over the years, of course, I continue to knit. This is the way that I improve my mental wellness. It relieves stress and it allows me to be very creative. But the yarn shops I visited, in my hometown and around the country, I still kept having these unpleasant experiences. And it's really funny because I knew that knitting was my preferred way to support my mental wellness. And I knew where to find my tribe, my community, but they didn't really want me. So eventually I started buying yarn online. So that's my yarn story. At least that's part of my yarn story. And it's just a way of showing how something as simple as buying yarn to support my mental wellness was a very different experience because of how I lived.
Thank you for sharing that story. But it didn't stop you from continuing to knit, which I think is so important. And I think that is an important takeaway. But you said that's not the end of your knitting story. Tell us more.
Okay. Well, in my update to my trends report, I spent some time talking about what we can do to try and add color to wellness. And essentially, there were two steps that I talked about. The first one was listen and learn, which is one of the reasons why I was so excited about your webinar and what you're going to do, because this is a great way to listen and learn about inclusion and diversity. But it also helps with the second step, which is take concrete action, whether big or small, to facilitate change. So believe it or not, the knitting community is a great illustration of what I'm talking about. A couple years ago, I got an email from the head of Vogue Knitting Group. Now, Vogue Knitting has for decades been helping to shape the nature of the knitting industry. Well, this email was a long and thoughtful message to the knitting community. And here's what it said. We have listened. We have heard your stories of rejection and pain. And we understand that the knitting community has a diversity and inclusion problem, and we intend to change it. So, clearly other people, other knitters had been speaking out about their experiences and sharing them. And more importantly, a major player in the industry had actually listened. They didn't just listen, they acted. They didn't just put models of color in their advertising or their knitting magazine. They created a diversity council to provide them with advice. They supported Black and brown knitters and entrepreneurs and showcased them. And they also worked to bring diversity and inclusion to knitting conventions and local yarn shops. And this didn't just affect people who looked like me and Indigenous knitters. It also helped provide a more supportive environment for men who love to knit, right? So this is a really positive outcome, and I wanted to share it because I think that what they did essentially was add color to knitting.
What a wonderful story. And it's just a nice example in how you increased awareness, or awareness was increased as a result. And it didn't impact just a woman of color like yourself, but it impacted other marginalized knitters. And in your example with men, it could be other dimensions of a person's social identity that maybe they might feel more included now, knowing that the Vogue, or organization cared really enough to do something like this. And so how nice that you got this email so that you could be aware of this. I'm also curious, in your trends report, you touched on so many topics. Tell me about the feedback that you have received from people, because I'm reading in the chat, your story has garnered people's emotions. People are saying, sharing is power. What an excellent story. And I'm seeing so many in the chat. What kind of feedback did you get from your trends report? I imagine it was something similar to your knitting stories feedback.
I think that people did really appreciate me sharing the personal side. As I said, it was very painful, and I actually talked to some of my family members and said, can I write about you? Because I understand that some of this is very, very personal, and you might not want everybody to know that these sort of things happen to you. But it's been positive. I mean, I think there's another side to it, which I touched on briefly in my report, which is there are Black and brown wellness professionals who are out there carving out spaces for people who look like us. And some of them say, you know what, we don't need your help. We don't actually even want your attention. We just want to be able to go ahead and create these spaces for people who look like us, places where they can feel safe. And my response to them has been, that's wonderful. And I think it's great that you provide this space and that it continues. But I think about people like my brother who's stuck out in Southern Georgia. He is not anywhere near a place where they have Black and brown wellness professionals who can create that safe space for him. He has to rely on going to the local gym or the local yoga studio. And that's why bringing this message of diversity and inclusion is so important.
And thank you. And I think what's so important that you shared is a safe space. And I think sometimes people don't think about wellness being an unsafe space, but the way you just described it, that could be the case. And you're really talking a lot about making sure we feel comfortable and our well-being is supported in terms of mental wellness. Could you share a little bit more about anything unique about mental wellness or the pathways to mental wellness in communities of color or among Black people from your research or your personal experience?
Well, in my report, I touched very briefly on mental wellness, and I talked about the fact that sometimes because of the type of experiences that we have as Black people, we actually are under a little bit more stress, or even more stress, not just financial stress, but social stress, right? And our avenues for finding relief or assistance are smaller. So there's this huge gap. You definitely have people out there now who are trying to create places where Black and brown people can come and get mental health. I mean, the internet has been a huge game changer in that respect, but there's still a huge gap. So, I talk about my son briefly, who, went to a park because he loves nature, and it was usually a great way for him to decrease his stress and anxiety. And that didn't turn out to be the case just because of the situation that he encountered. But people have stories like that. I mean, I went to my yoga studio one morning, I go there at 6 a.m. and I had a situation where instead of just going into class, I was asked to sit to the side and was put in a situation where I felt very stressed and very upset. And rather than stretching out and getting ready for class, I actually started my internal mantra saying, it's okay, don't get upset, it's okay. And the wonderful thing was I had a yoga instructor who valued me and who actually went out and said very loudly, you know, class is now, and I want you to be in class. That's what you're here for. Come here. And so she actually removed me and brought me into her classroom, which at that time was a much safer, much more comfortable space.
And thank you for sharing that story. My heart hurts, you know, by hearing that story. But someone took the time to observe what was happening and really took action, which is what we're hopefully wanting to think about in terms of empowering people within the wellness space. I think I'd like to transition to questions and answers because I want this to be interactive. You've shared so many great stories that really touched our heart and opened our minds and hopefully our hearts as well. So I'm going to ask Nancy and Susie if they don't mind, because they've been monitoring the chat, and feel free to put in more questions in the chat for the next 10 minutes or so, what questions that the audience might have for Tonya.
I will just say that in the chat, there's mostly praise and inspiration and acknowledgement of and gratitude for the sharing of these stories. The one question that has come up from Allie Stone is about whether this, I guess this topic right now, this conversation is a little US focused, and mentioning that, you know, there's positive examples of diversity inclusion in the wellness industry in other parts of the world, Asia, Middle East, Africa, China, Japan, etc. And so I'm going to let you guys address that, but I just want to say that this is the first in a series of calls. And one of the things that we want is for people to come forward and share with Nicola their perspective and their stories, so they might be included on a future call. And Nicola will be designing those calls to address the global nature of our organization and this issue. But I would just say if anybody, if either Nicola or Tonya want to address this in a more global perspective, to feel free, or if you want Allie to say something.
Sure, I'd be happy to respond to that. I mean, one of the things I thought about when I wrote my trend is that if I made it a personal experience, then I would have to shrink my discussion from one that would be more globally focused, more internationally focused, to the experiences of a Black African American. So that's why my trend was like that, one of the reasons why. But also, as a researcher and somebody who has traveled all over the world, you have problems with diversity and inclusion everywhere. It might just not be a case where we're talking about somebody who's Black. You might have somebody, it might be a question of culture. It might be a question of somebody who has, you know, Indigenous people who have been kept out of certain spaces. Other places where you have straight racism with regards to religion. And other cultures. It is very true, and I said this in my report, that I am talking in generalities. I mean, even in the United States, there are wonderful places that are diverse and inclusive, and there are great stories to talk about. So I would hate for people to leave this conversation thinking that I'm just focusing on these negative, but I definitely agree with her. And hopefully other people in conversations coming up can talk about their experiences. I'm a Caribbean American. I lived in Jamaica. And so my focus, if I were to talk about non-US, would be about inclusion with regard and marginalization, not just with regards to color, but with regards to income.
I think that's
Nicola,
I was just about to say, I fully agree. It's interesting. I'm also speaking as a person who is a Black woman, and my heritage is Jamaican as well. So we might have some similar views from that perspective, but we live in different parts of the country, and we have different experiences. So I think it's important to share the positives and the negatives. And I think most people in this world are good, but I think we need to acknowledge when missteps have occurred and what we can do to overcome them. So I value both sides of the story.
Thank you, Nicola. I was thinking that it was so valuable for me to hear your story, Nicola, and also Tonya. I'm wondering, there are people on this call who are Black or brown, and I know you are focusing specifically wellness in the African American community. I would love to hear some other stories of, especially if someone has had an experience within a wellness arena. And so I'm just liking to ask whoever might be on the call and want to express, just share a story. I love the storytelling idea. And I just want to encourage you to do that, because I know it's not so easy. Maybe, Nicola, you could be more encouraging, but could we have someone maybe share an experience that would be helpful for all of us just to understand what you've gone through in the wellness world?
Good morning.
Hi. Oh, sorry.
Good morning. I'm Deanna Lewis. I'm here in Tucson, Arizona.
Great.
And this isn't so much to speak of experiences that have been directed with me. And I can assure you, at the age of 59, I've had my share of experiences on a daily basis when we look at systemic racism, right? The other thing I think is important to acknowledge is that the intersections, right? Intersections of race and gender, gender-based violence, because I think really what we're talking about is violence, right? You're either, when you say a safe space, it's either safe or it's not safe. If it's not safe, harm is being conducted, right? And harm looks as something as simple as being ostracized, being excluded, right? So I think when we do a binary, right, we want to talk about not being binary, but when we talk about safe or not safe, it's binary. Am I being harmed? Am I not being harmed? It's binary. So there's a yoga studio in Tucson, and what we're seeing in creating, and I don't use the phrase safe space, because we can never create 100% safe space, because none of us know the life experiences of the person that we're communing with, right? So anything can trigger anyone, and that's why I think a trauma-informed approach is really important, because marginalized and vulnerable communities have histories of trauma, right? So I think the way we approach it. And so what one of the things that I've seen in my community is a very prominent yoga studio providing a space really that affirms identities, right? So you've heard the phrases BIPOC, QTPOC, so Black, Indigenous people of color, queer, trans people of color, right? Because, and I'll put this a link in there, but if you're not familiar with Kimberly Crenshaw and intersectionality, which is an important pillar, right? You can't always be 100% inclusive when we're just looking at single issues. And Audre Lorde speaks to, there is no single issue for people, right? We are not just single issue people. And so we're seeing more and more these spaces that storytelling circles. So I participate in for a month, and one specifically for BIPOC and one's for QTPOC. And so in the wellness, again, that's popped up in Tucson, a prominent yoga studio that's been in Tucson for probably 25 years plus, right? And I think it's okay. I don't own any stocks of them, but it's Yoga Oasis, right? We refer to it as Yoga Oasis. So that's one of my experience and just a little bit of a lens that I have.
I'll chime in. So Deanna, it's so nice to see you. And Deanna, if you don't mind me sharing, is a PhD at the University of Arizona. And I have learned so much from her. And I'm so glad that you brought up intersectionality. It's such an important topic that we are more than one identity. And it's important that we embrace and acknowledge and feel comfortable with all aspects and all dimensions of ourselves. So I appreciate you sharing your story. Does anybody else on the call have a story that they'd like to share as well? If you'd like to unmute yourself and share your story, we hope to hear from as many people as possible. And if there's time at the end, I'll share a story, but I want to hear from others.
Hi, this is sorry. This is Michelle Reed. I'm a family practice doctor. I only heard about this because my sister-in-law is all over LinkedIn, and she sent this. She's like, "This is right up your alley." So I missed the first part because I was seeing patients. But from one of the questions that I see, it was talking about access and affordability and encouraging people to be healthy. So as a family practice doctor, my brand is called Fit Doc Michelle Reed, because I really think that it goes back to me as the doctor talking the talk and walking the walk as to what needs to be done. I started my journey, I guess, growing up, always being into exercise. And then all of a sudden, I found out as an adult, I could run a marathon and I can get a medal for doing that. So then I started running marathons. But I think we also have to work with like changing the mentality of our patients, because people see me. Yes, I've lost weight. Yes, my body shape has changed. I've been told by my patients, like, you've lost so much weight, Dr. Reed, like you exercise enough for each of us. No, I need you to find something that you like to do, that you enjoy doing, that will help to make all the different changes that I suggest. Doesn't need to mean that you're going to have to be on medicine for the rest of your life. But if you make these certain steps, this is going to be a change. So from me doing that and starting to run more, I even learned how to swim last year in the open water during the pandemic. And all of a sudden, all of these women, especially I'm Black, and you can see with my hair, I think if I lift it up, I'm shaved on both sides and in the back. But I did this because I need something for convenience when I exercise. Oh my gosh, Dr. Reed, you're learning how to swim. I've always wanted to learn how to swim, but what am I going to do with my hair? It's you finding something that you are comfortable with. So now I have all these people who want to know how to swim, but we don't have access to a pool. So it's the different things, because the need is there. It's just giving people little, like, I guess maybe bacon bits to encourage them to make the change and to realize that even something as simple as one of my Fit Doc walks that we do on the weekend, walking doesn't cost you anything. All you need is a good pair of sneakers and you can go and we can walk, we can be healthier together. But it's really, for me, changing the mindset of what we are being told and maybe even how we grew up, so that we can continue to be healthy. And these wellness conferences, yes, we can start in one community and then go throughout the world, because we each have our own reason why we're not taking better care of ourselves.
Thank you, Michelle, or Dr. Reed, for sharing your story. I imagine your story is inspiring to us. So I can only imagine to your patients who know you over time, who value all of your opinions that you give to them, how inspiring your fitness approach is for them. Because, you know, as doctors, sometimes we don't exercise ourselves. So if we don't exercise and we're encouraging our patients to exercise, that's such a difficult approach. But you're walking the talk, which I think is so important. So thank you for sharing that platform. And I know that Etna also had her hand raised, that she wanted to share a story as well. So I'd like to pass it over to her. And then I think I see some other people who have unmuted who might want to share. So Etna, I'd love to hear what story you might want to share with us.
Well, I was thinking that I started my journey to understanding wellness via luxury spas. And it was a wonderful place to go, a canyon ranch, a Rancho La Puerta, and learn about wellness and fitness and nutrition. But I found over time that when I would come home, there was somewhat of a disconnect as I would talk with family and friends. It hit me that I was able to take advantage of a luxury that most people cannot afford. So I've started to rethink wellness now with the ideal that if you can add a luxury vacation experience, that's fabulous. But wellness has to be about affordability. So when I think in terms of wellness, I think in terms of the YWCA. I think in terms of getting involved in a local 5K race. I think in terms of taking a vacation at a local hotel that has a nice swimming pool. But wellness is about nutrition, and again, it's about affordable practices that make sense in your life, but the awareness. And I love that you guys mentioned finding that safe space. That safe space could be in a local park that you love too. And one of the wonderful things. I heard someone say recently that the pandemic made people wellness to the forefront in terms of conversation. So every community is thinking in terms of how to live healthier and happier lives. So I appreciate this conversation because it's about diversity and inclusion and the larger picture of wellness for everyone. At the end of the day, that's where we're all at, wanting to live a happy and healthier life. So thank you for the conversation.
Thank you, Etna, for sharing that. And what I love about what you shared is you talked about a variety of places that we can engage in wellness. You went from Canyon Ranch and Rancho La Puerta, and also on the other hand to the YMCA. And I know I've had a membership at the YMCA, and I've always felt included and comfortable, a sense of belonging there, just like I have at Canyon Ranch as well. So it's so nice that we can think about ways that people can access wellness and meet them where they're at. That's equity. So there are a couple of hand raised, and I think I'd like to go in order in which I've seen them. So first, Dr. Cook, and then Kimmy, and then Arena, and then Angela. Dr. Cook, if you wouldn't mind unmuting and sharing your story, please.
Well, I'm a general internist, spent time in the Navy, and had my own personal journey with this. But once I finished my training, I actually started working for the county health system in Chicago. And I had a very interesting opportunity to be part of a staff of basically it was a men's health clinic. It got featured on CNN, and it's interesting because one of the things that gets left out of this conversation are Black men. And throughout what we hear about women and more women not being included in space, it's even more so when you're talking about Black men, to the point that with everything that's around us, you could say that Black men are an endangered species as far as I'm concerned. However, there's been models that are out there that have been really trying to address this at one point. And one of the things that we learned through this clinic was that how can you reach out and really get Black men to engage in health? And it was as simple as a barbershop, to the point that I would say Black men were probably listening and trusting the barber more than they were listening to the doctor. And why is that so? The perception is that the only thing that doctors want to do is put you on a medication. And that's, to them, that's the only thing that they're getting when they go see a physician. There's not a conversation about health. There's not a conversation about being well. But what is it that is bringing Black men to the doctor? Always is a reactionary thing. And part of the same thing which is driving avoidance. It's always the perception of hearing or thinking that you're going to get bad information. So as we're talking about wellness and looking at this from a global sense, it's about changing behaviors. But what is it that we got to do in order to be able to give a better script to people to change their life? And a lot of it, 80 to 85% of this thing is about nutrition, what people put in their mouths to reverse chronic conditions, period. And that's, how do you get that into a community barbershop and to get guys to live a better existence? That's always a challenge. But from my experience, even for Black men as a whole, the barbershop has been a pretty important, pivotal piece. That's my 2 cents.
Thank you. That's more than 2 cents. Thank you, Dr. Cook. I was just in Chicago this summer, so I definitely love your area. You bring up such a good point, the inclusion of Black men in this conversation. And my husband is Black, and when I think about him going to the barbershop, sometimes he's there all day. I don't even know what they do at the barbershop. So I agree with you. He trusts his barber, maybe more than my medical decisions. I don't know. But I think you bring up such a good point of partnering with trusted people within the community. And that's really the barbershop, which I think is so important. In the interest of time, I'm going to move on because Kimmy also had her hand up, and then Irena, and then Angela. Kimmy, if you wouldn't mind unmuting yourself.
Hi, it's great seeing you again since the conference in Palm Beach. So I just want to share a very personal story and why this topic is so important. Normally, I don't like to speak, but this is something that I'm very, very passionate about. So I'm an immigrant and I'm Asian American. My family literally came over to America on a boat, had nothing whatsoever, came on a boat over to America. We were put into project housing and we had no money whatsoever. So given food stamps, and think about the food options you have with food stamps. My diet consisted of Spam and whatever else was available. And so fast forward time, let's just say this, that McDonald's was a luxury to consume. So think about $1 menu. That was a luxury for us. We couldn't even afford that, my family and I. And so my mom, being a farmer back in Vietnam, the little space that we had in the backyard, she started planting vegetables. And so that was how we were able to at least eat somewhat healthy. But the point is, cheap, inexpensive food is unhealthy. So fast forward time, 30 years later, I am a pharmacist, by the way. That is my background. That is my trade. And I got really, really sick, diagnosed with an autoimmune, and no one could figure, there's no pill, right, to treat autoimmune conditions. And so luckily I realized that the conventional traditional healthcare system was failing me because of what I was going through. So I started looking into nutrition, herbalism, and I also now, because I fell in love with it and was so passionate about it, also am a clinical nutritionist and herbalist. So I combine all of that knowledge in with my pharmacy degree. And I have been very lucky to have teamed up and work for companies that are the best in class wellness brands. And so I've been able to take all of that knowledge, and for a whole year, I spent time in Immokalee, Florida. So if anyone knows Immokalee, Florida, it is an incredibly, poor area. And this whole idea of like, oh, take a probiotic or take this supplement does not exist. They can't even afford, food, to put food on the table. So I spent a year volunteering my time to promote wellness in the community. And it just reminded me of where I came from and how important, as Dr. Cook had mentioned, nutrition is critical. So now, fast forward, I am now a part of this Clean Living Health and Wellness initiative where we are working with residents in the community, and we have access over to 100,000 residents that we've surveyed. And guess what they've said? That they want to be healthy. And this is the 99th percentile of the population. This is where they are struggling to pay rent, especially after COVID. They don't even know how to put food on the table. They're trying to just make ends meet. This is our population. We do not have this luxury residential portfolio. We have the 99th percentile portfolio where their rent is anywhere from $1,200 a month, and they are struggling to pay $1,200 a month.
To me, that is such an inspiring story. And I think I'm sorry to cut you off. I'm just in interest of time because I'd like to give Arena and Angela, hopefully to get to Angela, time because I'm acknowledging everyone's time here. So it's great to see you again, Kimmy. I grew up in an area where you live in South Florida. Really what touched me with your story is just how personal it is and where you came from, what you're doing now. It's inspirational. And I imagine, I don't know if you share your story with your clients and your patients, but it's so powerful to understand when a professional like you, Kimmy, has walked the journey that you've walked, that I think the vulnerable, marginalized communities really can trust what you say because you are you understand where they're coming from, and your caring really comes through in the story. So I appreciate you sharing your story so much. And I was hoping to move over to Arena because I see that you have your hand raised if you'd like to unmute.
Thanks so much. I'll be quick. I'm Irena Sargent, and I'm actually one of the members of the Mental Wellness Initiative. So loved this shout out. Very excited about that, and very excited about this conversation because it is much needed. So just short story, I found my way into wellness because of self-care. Like, I love massages. A massage table is my happy place. And then I found my way deeper in through burnout and the need for relief. And so not only did it expose me to the world of mental wellness, but it also is why I'm building my company all about burnout relief. And mental wellness is truly the pathway to really help the world understand that wellness doesn't look one way. It doesn't have to be the same thing for everyone. And these exciting conversations and the initiatives really help to speak to the diversity of wellness, which is often overlooked and is especially a way in to help this world find their path forward. So I just wanted to quickly say thank you for this conversation. And I'm excited for this world where we take all of this hard work, years of learning and research, and bring that approachability and accessibility into implementation. And so for anyone who's like, I don't know what to do, you do not have to be perfect. It's not about you being perfect. It's not about the research or the implementation being perfect, but it's about illustrating and exposing individuals to those pathways that you know and hold near and dear, and helping them understand how it can be applicable to their life and approachable, and like, it doesn't have to be one way. So thank you for having this conversation, and thanks for allowing me to connect. And I'm excited to continue to read all of the amazing research going on in this space.
Thank you, and thank you for
Nicola,
the work
I wanted to just jump in real quick because Irena was saying she is on the initiative for mental wellness. And I wanted to just mention that the Global Wellness Institute is starting an initiative on diversity and inclusion. And Christina Yap is on. She wants to be part of the leadership of it, but we're looking for other people to join her. So I just wanted to mention that. So if you're interested, maybe reach out to Christina or reach out to me, and we'll, it's in the works. So go ahead, Nicole. I just wanted to make sure that was in there before we end.
Thank you. In the interest of time, Angela, I just want to give you maybe 30 seconds just to share your story, because I want to acknowledge you've had your hand raised before I end it on time. Are you there?
Yes. Hi, everyone. I'm going to jump in quick. It's a personal story. I started my wellness journey in a homeless shelter with prostitutes and others with a little baby. I was burnt out of my home. I was working a 9 to 5. I was doing all the things. And from that point, living in a shelter, I began breathing. And I found that my wellness was accessed through me. And all I could do was breathe every day. I lived in that shelter for a year, and I was 18 years old. I was able to do that because 2 years prior, while I was pregnant, I was held at gunpoint. I was the person that when you play Russian roulette, the gun was held to my belly. I was 7 months pregnant and the person pulled their trigger. I learned how to breathe because I held my breath, and I connected to just a faith that I'll be okay if I could just talk to this person and say, hey, could you just give me a chance? And what they said was, oh my God, I can't believe that I got you pregnant. You're the darkest person I'd ever seen. My entire life, everything has been held against me because I'm a dark-skinned Black woman. I have been on my own ever since that time. I've lived in 3 different city shelters, and each time I have accessed wellness on my own because people judged me just by the way they saw me. When they saw my skin, I walked through the door, they saw a Black person. It wasn't a mixed race person. It wasn't a light-skinned person. It was a person of color that they knew automatically I didn't want them to be next to. Moving forward, because I know it's all over, because I know we have time. I don't have the time. I went into a yoga studio trying to, again, access health, just a mental well-being. People saw that I was a Black woman. No one would put their mats around me. The teacher walked all around me, and it was an all-white wellness space. Up until this day, even with COVID, after COVID, before, every place that I go, people hold their purses. That's a mental, a mental thing. I'm bubbling for time. But through all of that, I went on to be a celebrity hairstylist, being victimized as a hairstylist at different events because of the color of my skin. When you see me, you know that I am Black, and you can automatically just, have your feelings about it, your fear or whatever. All of that impacts my mental health every single day. even as much as yesterday, going to a store, people start to follow me no matter what I'm wearing. I am a yoga teacher. People wouldn't come to my class if they saw my Black face. We had to take my face off of our billings so that students would come in, and then you would see all the students. These are the interactions every day. It's a mental mind screw. So I am here to say that I'm enjoying this conversation, but at the end of the day, I make $120 a week and I take care of a complete family. The people that are in charge, that are able to help us, because I am the people that you are looking to help. Knowing who we are beyond what you see, beyond just a community that you want to serve, is not just dollar signs. It's not just how do we build it. This has been going on for years. I picked cotton. I'm 50 years old. I picked cotton because in my family, I was the darkest one. So all of these conversations are important, but we actually need you to come in. We need you to see us. We need you to see beyond those things. So I thank you for everyone that has shared. I had a bigger story, but I know I only have a small window of time. So I thank you all for this time and for this space, and I wish you all well.
Angela, thank you for sharing your story. I apologize that I don't have more time to hear your story. I know we'd love to connect with you and understand more. You've shared so much, and I appreciate you sharing. I know it's difficult to share a story with people you don't know. You've brought up so many issues that we need to do better. We need to do better as a wellness industry. We all should feel seen and heard and valued and respected. And I think what you're really talking about is when someone comes through the door, we don't know what trauma that they've been through. So we need to nurture each other. So I very much appreciate you sharing your story. So in the interest of time, I'm going to wrap up this first webinar. This has been phenomenal. I didn't know who would feel comfortable sharing stories or how this would go. I think this was a wonderful first webinar. Please expect for us to touch on different dimensions of diversity and inclusion. We again are going to center at the margins. We want to hear as many voices. The next webinar is planned, it's going to be quarterly, every quarter. The next webinar is planned for Tuesday, November 2nd. And I assume it's going to be the same time, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Okay, Nancy and Susie are shaking their head. Okay, yes. And if there are topics you'd like to hear, put it in the chat, reach out to me. And I value everyone on this call, respect all the stories we've heard. Thank you, Tonya, for being my special guest for this conversation. Everyone who has shared their stories verbally, as well as people who participated in the chat. Sorry we ran over, but have a wonderful day, everyone.
Nicola, thank you for your warmth and grace and openness. You did a wonderful job, and it's going to set the tone for all the webinars to come. So very much appreciate it.
Thank you, everyone. Have a
Everyone
great day.
can unmute and share some love.
Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you, Nicola.
Thank you, Nicola.
Fabulous job.